All right, so let's keep talking about group processes and move on to talking about a few different types of group influences. So just to kind of give you an overview of where we're going to end up, we're going to talk about a few different sorts of levels of how a person might be integrated with the people around them and how those kind of differ for implications about performance and behavior. So we'll start by talking about kind of the simplest, most surface level type of group influence, just if there are other people around or not, the mere presence of others. Then we'll talk a bit about group decision making and the problems that might arise from that sometimes. And then we will move on to talking about how we come to identify with groups, how that process happens, and what it says about conflicts between groups and what other things might lead to that. So as far as the mere presence of others, just people being around in general, there are two main things I want to mention, two main effects I want to talk about in terms of that. Not to say these are the only things that happen just from other people being around, but they're some of the most straightforward and long researched. Social facilitation and social loafing. Social facilitation meaning, like bringing about good performance or, things happening because of the social circumstances people are in. Social facilitation refers to the arousal from the presence of other people and the knowledge you are being evaluated at the individual level. So just by realizing that there are people around us, watching us, noticing what we're doing, and maybe judging us in some way, that can bring about this type of arousal. And sometimes it's good, but I'm also going to talk about ways that that might be bad as well. Social loafing, on the other hand, is a little bit different. That is when you have a group working toward a particular goal. In some circumstances, that might lead people to try less hard and not put forth their full effort because they're kind of relying on the collective effort of the group. So let's talk about both these in turn just a little bit. Social facilitation, remember this is that arousal or excitement that comes from other people evaluating you and watching you. You might have some different hypotheses about how this might work. Sometimes maybe it's going to help your performance. Sometimes maybe it's going to make you nervous and hinder it. And that does tend to be true, but it depends on a couple of different things. If there is another person around watching you do something, it kind of depends on what the task is, what this arousal is going to do. So someone else watching you is going to elicit some sort of reaction and excitement from you that we'll call increased arousal. And what that arousal tends to do is strengthen what we call the dominant response that you have. So maybe the most practiced or most likely response to something. What I mean by that is, maybe the simplest way to put it is, between different types of tasks, you might have different dominant responses. For tasks that are easy, and by easy, I mean like literally easy or simple, or I also can mean easy in different perspectives for different people. Like if you have a lot of skill as a cyclist or a musician or, somebody, doing anything like cooking or something that you have lots of practice at and you're confident at, that might be an easy task for you. For other people, it might be difficult. Difficult tasks might be things that are just literally objectively difficult, or things that you personally have little experience with or have had trouble with in the past. So other people watching you leads to this excitement and strengthens the dominant response to a task that you find easy or a task that you find difficult. For easy tasks, this is going to enhance your performance. It's strengthening the dominant response of you performing well on an easy task. Difficult tasks, it might impair your performance, that your dominant response might be to have trouble with this difficult thing. So other people watching you, having more scrutiny over you, making you more nervous, is going to lead to more impaired performance. I mean, one example we might use, imagine you are singing karaoke with some friends and you have a song that is your go-to song and you enjoy karaoke quite a bit, other people watching you might kind of energize you and lead you to do an excellent job singing that song that you really like to sing. You can tell I do karaoke all the time from the detailed level of my example that I'm using here. Not sure why I chose it, but I think it is still appropriate. But you might do an excellent job if it's something that you are practiced at and you find fun and easy. If you picked a song you've never done before, or maybe even better, if you have never done karaoke before and you don't really like to sing, having other people watch you is going to be problematic for you. It's going to make you nervous. You're going to feel that scrutiny of other people. It's going to be uncomfortable. And then your performance is probably going to be worse than it would have been if you were just doing it alone. So this is actually arguably the earliest finding in social psychology that social facilitation affects people in this way. And the kind of most basic finding was generally that it helped performance because the earliest researcher here, Norman Triplett, was just watching people, do tasks that were relatively simple. So he first noticed as he was watching cyclists going around a track that the same cyclists, if you would record their time, they would almost always be faster against each other than if they were just going against a clock. They were going by themselves around the track and just being timed. But other people around and that kind of level of observation and competition was leading them to be better. He followed this up by kind of giving children fishing reels and line and giving them, a certain length and asking them to wrap it up as fast as they could. Well, when he had children do this alone, they did fine. Excuse me. But when the children did this with partners, they did it much more quickly as they wrapped the line around the fishing reel. But more recent looks at this in maybe slightly more realistic settings than kids wrapping a fishing reel had to do with trying to manipulate whether people thought this was an easy or difficult task that they were working on. And kind of going along with my karaoke example, a study that looked at pool players actually in pool halls and bars, when there were observers around and people that were not good at pool had to play, they tended to perform worse. Having somebody watch you do something that you're not confident about and you find difficult makes it harder for you to do it, and you kind of are undermining your own performance by being distracted by it. Skilled pool players, though, people that are comfortable and have fun playing pool and are good at it, if there are people watching them, then they tend to do even better. So it doesn't just facilitate in the sense it makes everyone better all the time. It facilitates in the sense that it encourages the dominant response. And for easy tasks, that's going to be performing well. For difficult tasks, that's going to be performing more poorly. And remember, easy and difficult are kind of subjective to each individual. Okay. It does seem that just other people being around is all that's necessary for this. It's not, necessary that it's competition or anything. And we know from other research, too, that there are just complications that arise when other people are near us. That, when you're alone, you tend to be more relaxed in general, and having other people close to you is going to make you more physiologically aroused and excited and tense. The negative parts of this reaction, that your dominant response on difficult tasks might make your performance worse, sometimes is called evaluation apprehension, which is just what it sounds like. You're apprehensive about being evaluated. That if you're worried people are going to think poorly of you, you are going to kind of overthink things and be distracted and interfere with your own performance. Remember this idea of evaluation apprehension, as it's something we're going to come back to when we talk about stereotypes and stereotype threat in a few lectures when we're in the prejudice unit. It's also the case that, other people just tend to take up some of your attention, that you would have to not attend to people if they weren't there, right? So if they're in your field of vision, then that might distract attention that you need from doing a difficult task. But for a well-practiced task, maybe you just don't really need that level of attention. Okay, so that's facilitation. Social loafing is another interesting effect that we tend to find that just has to do with the mere presence of others, but also when you're working together with somebody. So social loafing, if you haven't thought about this before or can't guess from the name, just basically, again, means when people are reducing their effort. But why do they do that? It seems that when we are alone working on something, we are very identifiable, we're responsible for what's going on. If you're working alone, then somebody sees the product of your work and they know 100% that was your fault or your credit to finish that project or something. But when you're working in a group, it's not as clear where the credit should go. Maybe one person did all the work. Maybe people shared it. Maybe it was something totally different because of how they collaborated. So in group settings, the credit is not as clear, and if you don't try as hard, then it doesn't reflect as poorly on you. In addition, if you do kind of slack as you're in your group, you might be confident that other people in your group are going to pick up that slack and continue on. Oh, sorry. So if we don't do our job, we're not pulling our own weight, then other group members might pick up on that. So a classic study that had to do with this was actually done in France. They had participants pull a rope in a tug of war, and they had it manipulated so they would either do this in a group or do it alone. And they, instead of doing a real tug of war with two groups, they actually just had the rope tied up to a scale that would measure the force that they exerted when pulling. So what you would expect if everybody is working just as hard alone versus in a group is that you could add up the number of pounds or kilograms that someone was exerting on this rope with all their other group members' forces, and they should be equivalent. But that tends not to be the case. It tends to be around half as much. So that people trying to do this task, pulling on a rope, are really, really slacking just because there are other people. Even though they're getting the same instructions, pull as hard as you can, this is going to measure how much force you're exerting, and it tends to be a pretty striking level of social loafing here. So I'm sure that some of you have experienced this, been on, either one end or the other of this in group work and stuff, right? That you have a group project and maybe you're either the person that assumes that you're not going to have to work as hard, or you're the type of person that is going to pick up the slack for other people. The sad truth is that all of you are probably going to slack a little bit, even the people that are trying hard, and even if somebody is making up for some of the work, it's not going to be as good as if all of you were trying hard. So what sorts of conditions can we implement to try to make this stop? What can we do to decrease social loafing? So if you kind of just undo some of the things that I described about group work in general, then you're going to decrease some of these problems. So I mentioned how in lots of group settings, your individual performance is not clearly identifiable. Well, if you make it so everyone has a specific piece that other people are going to know about, like I wrote the introduction, Sarah wrote the method section, Jen wrote the results section, and Bob wrote the discussion section. If we know all these different pieces that everyone is doing, then that social loafing is probably not going to happen. Because if the whole paper is good and the introduction is terrible, then that's just going to reflect on me and not so much on my other group members. So you might still have work towards a product that's collaborative in a sense, but some identifiable components. Sometimes people, might discount their own contribution to a group or think that everyone's collective work is not necessary. But if you emphasize that everybody's effort is necessary to make a good product, then this, might lead people to perform a little bit better. And maybe the least surprising of all of these, if people don't care about the task, then they're definitely going to slack, right? So you need to make it something that is important to people, that they actually want to do well at, or they're just going to kind of phone it in. Another one that is relatively straightforward, that if there's no skin in the game, if there's no consequences or anything like that for poor performance, then people are not going to try to avoid that consequence, right? But if there's a poor outcome, then you might see people try a little bit more too. One of the few times that punishment is actually a kind of a good motivator. And finally, if you have a group that is really big, people are, going to be even less identifiable. Their performance might be even less clearly tied to themselves. So if a group is much smaller, then you're going to get a better performance out of everybody on average. So this can be a time when, you want to limit your groups to make sure that people are actually feeling responsible for the product a little bit more. Okay, so turning a little bit towards more general concerns in group processes, I talked about this distinction, or a distinction I'm about to make when we started talking about relationships and attraction. But, up to now I've just been really talking about the mere presence of other people or group work when it, might be kind of an ad hoc group. But I do want to draw a couple distinctions that I think are useful. A group really can be pretty much any assemblage of people that have any kind of shared identity or interdependence. So a group for some people, or a salient group for some people, might be, for example, their extended family, their siblings and grandparents or grandkids or parents or whatever it happens to be, cousins. You might have an identity that is relatively strong around this. Some people identify less with the people in their extended family, but lots of people still tend to identify with their immediate family. These are groups in the sense that you're genetically related, much of the time, but you share some sort of history, certainly. But sometimes you identify with them more or less. There might be other identities like the school that you attend. Families are very specific in the sense that they're built on relationships rather than any type of, circumstance, right? Like you're born into a family, but the relationships that you maintain in them are kind of what makes it matter. There are other more diffuse groups on the total other end of the spectrum. So being a student at the University of Minnesota or at Tulane or any other school is a really diffuse group membership that, you don't know every person on campus, but you still have a connection to them because of decisions that you've made and shared activities that you might engage in. Maybe not at the same time, but, being somebody who, ate in Brough and then ate in the Commons, like that is a shared experience that links you to a lot of people that others across the country don't necessarily have. Closer to some of the stuff I talked about with social facilitation and social loafing, there might be, groups that coalesce around a particular project, whether it's in a work setting or a school setting, but you might have groups that are, kind of fluid. They're not things that last with you like a family membership or where you went to school. Maybe they arise when a project is necessary and they dissolve when the project is finished. So they might be more transitory in certain types of settings. You might also have groups that are made up just totally of elective friendships. It's not something that you're born into or something that's forced upon you because of where you chose to go to school or work, but you totally elect to go into them, and they might be more fluid as well, in the sense that people can come and go, and it still feels like the same group, even if not every person is present, and they still might have kind of the same dynamic. Other groups might be very tight because of shared experiences, like on a football team or in the military or something, where you have a shared experience that binds you together, like basic training or spring training or something. And there are lots of kind of rituals involved with bringing you together so you can undergo difficult circumstances and overcome adversity and things like that. And for these types of people, there are even frequently visible things that tie them together, like uniforms, for example. Uniforms and a specific way of looking are a good way to get a group to feel as though they have some kind of shared link and identity. And sometimes this goes beyond the people, of course, that, are just the ones doing this actual work, right? So fans of football teams or other sports teams and people that went to different schools, they might wear paraphernalia from those teams, and they might feel very strongly about the team, even though they really have nothing to do with it, right? It's just something that they've been either socialized into or chosen to care about. But they might still feel very strongly about it because of their experiences around that, even though, realistically, someone should not necessarily have the most strong feelings in the world about a group that they have never actually, done anything directly for, right? But this is how strong social identities are, that we feel very strongly about things like this, even if we don't have direct experience with them. Other groups worth mentioning, religious groups, another very diffuse type of group where you might have a congregation that is very tight-knit and know people in that group based on your shared beliefs and experiences, but frequently that shared set of beliefs extends well beyond a congregation or a temple, right? That it extends to other people that share those religious beliefs. So religion is one that's interesting in that it can be very personal and close, or it can be very diffuse in the sense that some religions have over 1 billion adherents that you might feel some sort of kinship or connection with. Other group ties that are, pretty diffuse are things like being a member of a particular nationality, like being an American or someone from, I'm cycling through lots of different countries that I could say, and I am honestly having trouble coming up with a word that is akin to American. I just keep thinking like person from China, person from France, because I can only think of gendered terms about how to say a person from another country, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But nationalities are ways that we might feel connected to other people, and like some other group memberships, when that's the biggest thing that you're caring about, and you're caring about that at the expense of other people, it can be very destructive and lead to things like wars. And those big diffuse identities often don't have lots of really powerful pro-social benefits unless there is like a crisis, like a terror attack, or something like maybe what we're seeing right now is people are collectively acting to protect each other in terms of isolating and things like that. Other social groups have to do with, shared cultural customs, and they might sometimes be misunderstood by other people as well. So certain types of ethnic and cultural groups have certain ways of dressing that include various head coverings, for example, and they might be different across those different cultures, but from outsiders, sometimes they might seem like they're, the same just because someone's head is covered or something like that, or they're wearing some kind of flowing type of garment, or, because they have some particular, facial hair or something like that. So people might overgeneralize when they see certain group markers, that people that are within those groups know there are big differences between them and other groups. So sometimes a group is much better understood from inside than outside, and people might not really have a fully nuanced understanding of those. Other things too, just to mention, like more elective groups that might matter to you a whole lot at one point in your life and might change over your post-school life, like joining a sorority or fraternity. Those are groups that you are, very invested in and putting forth a lot of effort to get into, and then maybe later in their life they matter in a different way, or they matter less. But all these groups they're all groups, right? They're all very, very different. Some are diffuse, some are very close-knit, some are fluid, some stay together for a long time, some are things that you need to personally maintain, some are ones that you are just kind of deciding that you're a part of, right? So a group really is any sort of identity or collection of people. So I made a distinction before when we started talking about more than one person in relationships and attraction. Dyads are two interdependent types of people. But what we'll talk about here in this section are small groups and collectives. So small groups are any assemblage of more than two people who have some sort of interdependence, meaning they share some sort of outcomes, perhaps even goals, and they influence one another in some way. So, small groups that you might belong to, families would fit in here too, to some extent, like small religious groupings, like not all of Islam, but maybe a mosque might fit into small groups in a sense if you know all those people in it. Other things that are a little bit different from small groups are collectives, for example. You don't know every person who is a Saints fan, but you have common activities and you share a type of identity from being a Saints fan. So those types of connections can feel very strong, even though they are diffuse in the sense that we don't know all those people directly and we don't directly influence one another. Okay, I'm going to take a break there, and I will come back to talk, a little more in particular about group research findings after kind of giving you the lay of the land there.